What's happening, people? Over the past 3 to 4 decades, as the curtains obscuring the illusion behind the world have fallen in an Oz-like fashion, we have begun to realize, we've begun to understand that what we thought was the point or the reason likely isn't. We've become increasingly nihilistic, and it's become popular to hold the opinion that intelligence equals a meaningless existence. And of course, a person can rationally hold that nothing is meaningful, that there is no meaningful thing. But that's only possible by taking an absolute and universal perspective. And by taking that perspective, you necessitate the inverse of that perspective, in my opinion. And the inverse would be that everything is meaningful, that everything is equivalently meaningful. Now, we could easily stop here and say that we should all be agnostic on meaning because both extremes are true simultaneously. Everything is absolutely meaningful and absolutely meaningless at the same time. So, what are we going to do? Well, we don't live at these extremes. We live somewhere in the middle. So, if you believe meaning is something that you like to have, something that you could benefit from, and would like to possess, but you just can't accept something that doesn't make rational sense, that isn't intellectually sound, I'm going to offer up 3 arguments, 3 positions that will hopefully be seen as sound and reasonable to you, at least be worth chewing on for a little bit. So, first, logic. Then, secondly, the logic of the universe. And then, third, the centric position. And if you need a refresher, logic is just the science of valid inference, the science of argumentation. It helps us ensure that all rational parties will arrive at roughly the same, if not exactly the same conclusion, based on the same starting point, based on the same premises and theory. It helps us maintain structure and rationality and form so that everyone is in agreement upon the outcome, on the same reality from the same starting point. You see how powerful this is. It helps us all be in agreement, even if we disagree on what we started with, the premise being valid. We will all be in agreement that we arrived at the correct conclusion based on that premise. We will at least have some commonality, some place to work from, to a shared reality, to a common and shared truth. So it's powerful. We just don't use it every day because it's cumbersome, it's taxing, it's energetically costly and intensive. But it's so powerful, in fact, that it's extended itself pretty much fully to computation, computer theory, programming. It's so powerful, in fact, that it underpins pretty much all of mathematics in a set theoretic fashion. But we're not talking about mathematical or computational logic here. We're talking about natural language logic in this situation, Aristotelian logic, propositional and predicate logic. At the 0th level of logic, it's easy to see that countless rational cases and arguments can be made for meaning's existence and importance. At this level, the conclusions pretty much flow necessarily from the premises. For example, premise 1, if something is experienced, it exists. Premise 2, meaning is experienced. Conclusion, meaning exists. Premise 1, if we experience the absence of something, it must exist. Premise 2, we experience the absence of meaning. Conclusion, meaning exists. As you see, we can deduce almost without effort, almost without thinking, that meaning exists if you accept these premises. The conclusion flows and follows almost necessarily from the premise in a syllogistic fashion, or what an Aristotelian logician would call a syllogism. And they're very powerful for this reason because we are all in agreement and it's very easy to see. However, this is not the way we think and this is not the way we speak. So for more language capacity, for more descriptive capacity and power, we need to step up our level of logic to at least the first, where we can essentially quantify and qualify non-logical entities like people, places, and things, turn them into variables, and essentially do a math on language. For example, in the sentence, for every experience, reality is subjective or objective. We can induce from our own knowledge base that experience is a subjective reality and that experience and reality are equivalent, at least in this argument. Second order logic, unlike first order logic, allows us more ways to quantify and discuss things, including multiple entities and the predicates of the argument. To illustrate this, we can make the argument that there is no reality X, subjective or objective, where every experience of that reality X isn't a subjective experience. Without going too deep, we can easily reason that everything we experience will be subjective, even if we're experiencing and discussing things that we can agree upon objectively. Hopefully you see what I'm doing. I'm just walking the brain through logically sound theories and hypotheses to establish meaning in a way that makes rationality a requirement. We're just doing math with words, so our calculations should tell us that even if there is an objective reality, from our perspective, everything will be experienced personally and subjectively. Lastly, for every subjective reality, there exists one that is experienced as being more real or as real, but not less real than an objective reality. We don't have to think very hard to come up with a subjective reality that fits this assertion, this logical argument pretty much universally. Love. Love is something that we can't quantify. It's not something that we can objectively describe. However, it is something that we all desire or experience the lack or absence of. The point of this argument isn't to champion the wonders and merits of logic, even though logic is very wonderful and very useful. It's simply to stress, to drive home the fact that meaning, its existence and importance can be had, can be obtained reasonably and rationally. You don't have to be intellectually unsound or irrational to accept meaning as an important and existing phenomena in your life. And if this isn't clear, you just have to work through enough logical arguments, and it should be seen as apparently true and clear. There is a logic to this universe. In fact, this universe can be thought of like a logical argument, and your experience, if this argument is sound and valid, can be thought of like the conclusion. In this description, a word or sentence is formed by the universe. It's communicated, and it's heard by someone, no one, or by us as life experience. The syntactical structure of the universe, including our brains and bodies, gives order to the things, the happenings, the no things occurring in the universe so that they may coalesce and culminate in a semantical equivalent of human experience. The universe speaks continually. Words are spoken all of the time and heard mostly by no one. But when they are ordered in such a way that they have meaning to us, we experience a moment of existence. To help us detail what I call the logic of the universe, we can borrow the bare basic concepts from something called meaning text theory to help us build a framework for understanding our experience of existence, and also why meaning is pretty much inescapable from a personal and individual perspective. For brevity's sake, we're simply going to borrow the levels of representation for use as an existential framework. And if you're interested in this non-theoretical theory, if you want to know more about it, I've put a link in the description, but simply, it's an incredibly powerful way of representing a logical language so that computers can make sense of what's being communicated. The first level in this description, phonetic representation, can be thought of as an equivalent to happenings in a fundamental level or layer of reality. For example, fluctuations in space-time or fields of energy, the movement of an absolute mind, or the motions of fundamental particles. The second level, morphological representation, once again in this description alone, can be thought of as a temporal sequencing of physical and non-physical events. The third level, syntactical representation, is how our brains, minds, and bodies, really the entire universe, is structured physically and energetically. The fourth, the last, and the most important, is semantical representation, which is our experience of the preceding levels. This level, the level of individual and subjective experience, is also the level of meaning for us in our lives. If the other layers don't lead to something that is semantically meaningful, i.e. experienced, it isn't a meaningful part of our existence simply because it won't be known to us. The universe speaks, time orders, if it exists, and because our bodies and brains are in and of the universe, it also gives structure to what is spoken so that a semantically complete and sound sentence is experienced. In normal language, if someone speaks incoherently, if someone speaks in incomplete and broken sentences, we can draw no meaning from the sentences and the words themselves, even though they may allow us to infer something about the person speaking. There will be no information communicated if the person speaking doesn't make sense, which means no story of a reality or a truth will be painted. That's how we should conceptualize our existence and the universe in this argument, as an ongoing narrative or story composed of countless words and sentences. Each word being a moment of existence, with those words forming sentences, paragraphs, and pages we can think of as an intelligible and meaningful experience of existence. Individual words, solitary moments of existence, are not insignificant. They just don't have meaning in and of themselves as standalone objects until we relate them, until we connect them to at least one other word or another object, be it tangible or intangible. Conceiving of ourselves, in my opinion, as the recipients of a cosmic dialogue, we can view the relating of words like a process of life where every word is heard, but it only takes on specific meaning when it's related to something else, explicitly or implicitly. For example, the word love seems like it has meaning as a standalone object by itself, but that's only true because we instinctually relate that word to felt experience or to some other known thing. To be clear, it isn't the word that has meaning. It isn't the physical or mental universe that grants us meaning. It is the fact that things relate in a certain way so that we hear them, we understand them, and we experience them. That is what provides meaning to the events, to the relationships between objects, words, and things in this universe that grants them meaning. Physical reality is syntax, it's logic. It has no meaning, no purpose other than to provide a framework, a structure, so that events, things, and happenings can be ordered in a semantically meaningful way. In looking to a physical reality for meaning, it's kind of like looking at the grammatical concepts in the sentence alone, the ordering of subject, predicate, and verb alone for meaning. It doesn't seem to make sense. Ordering is important, of course, and so are words, but neither the phonetic, the morphological, or the syntactical representation levels carry meaning by themselves. Now, the universe will always be speaking, and a word will always be said as long as there's at least a quantum fluctuation in some field of energy or in the fabric of space-time. However, it will not enter our conscious awareness as experience until the logic of the universe is congruent, is sound and complete with respect to the logic of human existence. In a very real sense, if you experience, you have meaning, because effectively that's what meaning is, and that's what the universe is for. Or it isn't for anyone or anything conscious and aware. And to deny any moment of your existence as meaningful is seemingly to say that the universe is invalid in terms of its syntactical arrangement, that the universe must be altered or changed. It's wrong because what we're experiencing right now is insignificant. When we ask what this universe is for, it's a voice box and it's a framework. And when we ask what the meaning of life is, it is known in each moment of experienced existence. Of course, we are aware of experiences beyond the ones we're having at a given moment, more potential experiences, potentially a universe of experience to be had. However, we don't concern ourselves with what we're not having any more than we concern ourselves with all words that we're not hearing spoken when we're reading a sentence or listening to someone talk in a video. It is the ones that we're having that give us meaning to the exclusion of all other words. And it is experiences that we're currently having that make our lives meaningful in exclusion to all other potential experiences that could be had. And the exclusion of all potential experiences other than the ones we're having are what allow us to have a personal individual experience of existence. If all experiences were had at once, we would experience nothing. It would be an absolute experience of no thing. And if all words were heard at once, we would hear nothing. Now, to be fair, to be honest, it could end up being that ultimately this universe is meaningless. But that does not mean that there won't be moments in really long stretches in this incredibly long story where some sense can be had, where some intelligible and meaningful experience can be possessed. Because our experience is intelligible, we can deduce that this is at least a sensible portion of a story, even if the rest of the story, the narrative, and the sentence is not. And really, we shouldn't dismiss this story, this narrative, this universe at all, because it's really just beginning to stretch its legs. It's not even 15 billion years old, and by most estimates, by some accounts, this universe is going to have a useful life of hundreds of trillions, if not quadrillions of years. So to dismiss something that's really just begun to unfold is pretty arrogant and pretty hubristic. No, we don't know if our lives, if our actions will impact this story, the narrative, in any meaningful and significant way in the long run, or at all. But if we have free will, we can try to at least write a word or two in this grand cosmic story. And by doing so, even if we saw this as meaningless before, we have imposed meaning on it for a small portion at the very minimum, and really necessitated that meaning will always exist in some fashion, even if it's only historically. We can think of our situation, our predicament, topologically. When we look at a topological map, a map with three-dimensional relief, a globe with three-dimensional relief, and we're up close, we can see variation and distinction across the Earth's surface. But when we're far enough away, everything looks smooth across the Earth's surface. It looks indistinct and unvaried. And this is how we have an issue and have a problem finding meaning. This is why we don't see it from an absolute perspective, because things look smooth. They look equivalently meaningless from that vantage point. But up close, from the personal perspective, things are meaningful. The reason it feels like nothing matters, like meaning is impossible to possess, is because everything matters equivalently from the absolute perspective. And as I said in the last video, part 1 of this series to be exact, we are not absolute in our experience, in our individuality. We are limited. We have a relative experience. And from this relative, distinct, and limited position, like being up close to a topological map or globe with relief, we can see things distinct, as higher and lower, as superior or inferior. The thing we need to accept if we know it, or understand if we don't, is that there is no privileged position with respect to the absolute or reality with a capital R. If we took an absolute perspective and saw a privileged position from that vantage point, then there would be nothing lost from taking that vantage point, and there would be nothing gained from having a personal experience of individuated existence. They would be equivalent. If we think of our fundamental existential predicament as being analogous to our fundamental physical predicament, it may help to drive this point home. In exactly the same way there is no central or focal point of the universe, There's no focused or defined meaning in an absolute sense. Thanks to theories like inflationary cosmology, we understand that the universe is expanding uniformly in all directions and will appear to be doing so from any vantage point. We know that wherever we stand, we'll see the same thing, a globally homogeneous universe. So there's really no way to qualify any position in spacetime as being more or less advantageous, more or less desirable or relevant than any other when considering the whole. Now that we know of a potentially boundless cosmos far beyond the Earth and our galaxy, we don't and can't say that the Earth is the center of the universe with any rational sincerity. At one point, it seemed obvious and apparent that we were the point of it all because our terrestrial perspective is where we stand to view, know, and experience the rest of it all. As soon as we became aware of a vast reality beyond our solar system, the Earth realized its proper position with respect to the whole, equivalently important or unimportant. Using the same logic, it makes sense why a person would deny meaningfulness and accept meaninglessness for their existence, but we are not the planet Earth, and our meaning and significance isn't derived from our position in space-time. Our meaning and significance is derived internally from a relationship between self and world, known only as an experience to self. When it comes to the subjective, especially with important and impactful things like meaning and love, we should not think of ourselves as being in a universe, looking for them in a universe. We should think of ourselves as being a universe, closed and complete, individual and personal, where these things will be had and realized and experienced internally. And this isn't hyperbole either. This is the nature of our physical and mental existence. Our view is an absolute view for sure. It's just not an absolute view of all reality and existence. It's an absolute view of our internal universe. From that perspective, things that are meaningful absolutely, but only with respect to our understanding, awareness, and experience of whatever we're accepting or holding. If we experience something, there's no denying its existence, and if something is wrong, right, or necessary, there's no denying the truth within our pocketed unitary verse. This is how a seemingly relative position becomes an absolute one. And this is how a perspective that makes absolute meaning and significance untenable, unholdable, gets shifted to one that makes it inescapable. I think the thing people most often forget and dismiss is that a thing does not need to be privileged with respect to the universe, the absolute, or the whole to be vaulted and elevated in terms of significance and importance to us. The Earth is not special in any way with respect to the universe at large, but it is to us. It's vaulted and elevated in terms of importance to us because this is where we stand, and we really can't stand anywhere else. So a position, a vantage point, a perspective that is occupied necessarily is vaulted and elevated above all others because that's the one you're currently experiencing, that's the one you know best and most directly. Meaning and location are non-centric, clearly, with respect to the absolute and the universal, but they're absolutely centered on us and our minds in terms of our experience of existence. Now, this was long, but it needed to be because I needed to make my point that meaning is an existing and real and desirable phenomena. It's not absolutely, but it is subjectively within the universe of you, within your internal universe. It's absolutely real if you experience it and see it and know it there to be true. And that's something you have to work toward. You may have to work through many arguments of your own construct, of your own formation, in a logical and rational fashion to help put the doubt to bed. You may have to find more evidence externally outside of this argument that I've put forth in this video. But you should also probably start to think of yourself as the recipient of a universal conversation, a universal dialogue, a cosmic story being written where you are the recipient of a small part, you witness a small part, and maybe even influence a small part, but a story that has just begun, that you can't know the full totality and point and meaningful significance of. You do know this. You do know that everything you experience within this story, within this dialogue and narrative, is absolutely meaningful to you within your pocketed unitary verse, your internal state. It is absolutely true and meaningful as you experience it. It's just not absolute because that is not what you are. Everything is equivalently true and meaningful, absolutely, just not within a small contextualized, parameterized existence and reality that we call individual experience. Now, if this isn't enough to satisfy your intellect and put these questions to bed, if you still have doubt, if you don't feel it here, then that's what the next video is for, to inform your intuition. We've informed the mind, hopefully. You know that meaning is possible. You know that meaning exists and you want to work toward it. And maybe you believe something is meaningful. You just can't feel it like you want to. So the next part of this series, the last part, part 3, is working on informing the intuition so that we have a congruence intellectually and internally. And that's very important. That's the part that really energizes and catalyzes and coalesces our life into a purposeful endeavor. So like and subscribe, hit the bell notification icon so that you get the notification for that next video. Let me know in the comment section below if you have any questions or concerns. And I will be setting up a forum for questions in exchange, a dialogue of sorts on my own website here soon. So if you have questions about things like this, we'll be able to get into a conversation, a shared conversation in a more contained and secure format over there pretty soon. So be patient on that. I'm sure that a lot of these things have follow-up questions, plenty of in-depth questions and concerns and some critiques and some pushback. We don't have the space to do that in YouTube. Unfortunately, YouTube is not the best place to have a conversation. I don't get all the notifications, yada, yada. So we'll work on that, and I will see you on the next video. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you appreciated this. I hope this helped. Like I said, if it doesn't, if you have any questions, if it did, let me know in the comment section below for real, and I'll try to get back. I'll try to keep an eye out for the notifications on this video specifically, at least for the next couple of weeks. So I will see you on the next one. You have a great day. Take care. Later.